Today, we are beyond excited to welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar, as we say in the Midwest, oh, for neat. You know her from her work on many Senate committees, including the powerful Senate Judiciary Committee. You know her as a presidential candidate who made the primary debates significantly more enjoyable to watch. If you're lucky enough to be from Minnesota, she's been your senator since 2007, and in 2016, she was the senator who got the most bills signed into law. Welcome, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Alyssa. It's great to be on. And by the way, as you were talking about the presidential primaries, I did want to note that this weekend I stayed in Washington this past weekend, and I hung out with Mayor Pete, now Secretary Pete.
Oh, so, you did?
We went on a walk. We had lunch with his dogs. It was actually, he's great, and he's doing really well.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you film it to make a montage out of it?
No, well, there were some people who saw us that were kind of in shock about the situation and took it somehow, but
I love that. I want regular updates on this friendship. This is great.
We've gotten along for quite a while.
That's great. That's great to hear. So today we're recording on a Wednesday. You came to us fresh from chairing the Senate's first hearing on the For the People Act, also known as H.R. 1. So why are Republicans freaking out about this so hard and using hyperbolic words like chaos to describe what will happen if it passes? What are they so afraid of?
I think that's such a great question because come on now, these are reforms that are in place in many, many states, including a number of red states. One of the biggest states for vote by mail is Utah, not exactly a bright blue bastion of liberalism. And the point is that these are things that they're afraid of. The last election, they lost the presidential in a big way. A record number of people voted, which was just inspirational given that we were in the middle of a pandemic. So Democrats and Republicans and independents voted in record numbers. Why? Because they felt it was their constitutional duty. And here's the key. In a number of states, it became easier to vote. The pandemic pushed people to say, okay, we'll try vote by mail. States said, okay, we'll stop making people have a notary public come to their hospital room when they have COVID, that they've got to have, this is a true story, someone sign an affidavit through the window of the hospital room. So all of that stuff changed. And my argument today was, so why would you close the door? There was no fraud in this election. It is very clear. Trump's own Homeland Security Department said it was the safest election in American history. So you want to keep those reforms in place. And what's been going on is now there's over 300 bills introduced to dial it back, to suppress the vote, to make it harder to vote. And so that's what this bill, and they are afraid because instead of changing their policies or their messages, or maybe even their candidates, they're doubling down. And they said, well, how can we win? Well, the only way to win is to lop off those voters that turned out sometimes for the first time. And that's why this bill is so important. And it's, as Trevor Potter, who was my favorite witness, there were great witnesses, of course, Eric Holder, and I won't stop, the Secretary of State of Michigan, who was incredible, but the former Republican chair of the Federal Election Committee came and testified for the bill because his point is this doesn't necessarily help one party or the other. Let's face it, Montana had record numbers. They did vote for Republicans in the last election. So it doesn't help one party or another, but what it does is it makes people feel part of a democracy. They have a say. That's what we're supposed to do.
Senator, you recently came out in support of eliminating the filibuster because passing the For the People Act is so critical. Joe Biden and several Senate Democrats ran on platforms that can only be enacted if they make it through the Senate. Is there any chance that these legislative priorities will make it through the Senate with the filibuster still intact?
We're going to try, but one of the reasons that I have come out in favor of getting rid of the filibuster and have been advocating for reform now and part of efforts to reform it for years, as someone you pointed out, Erin, who does work across the aisle all the time, at some point, you've got to get stuff done. The voters voted for change. Think about the America Rescue Plan, which was welcomed by and supported by Democratic and Republican voters overwhelmingly. It seemed like every Republican wanted it, except the people that worked in this building. Okay, if we had just gone and negotiated through the summer, it would have been a disaster. We wouldn't have had the money out for the vaccines. In this case, we had to use this archaic procedure called reconciliation to do it with 51 votes, right? 51 votes. Well, that's what this is about. There's other important things that we have to do that don't fit into that reconciliation box, including democracy reform, including the work that needs to be done on everything from climate change and renewable energy to the work that needs to be done on, say, given the tragedies we just saw in Colorado and what we just saw sadly in Atlanta, simple things like background checks. We have Republican support for background checks, but we never made it to 60 votes. So I guess we don't have something that 80% of the people in this country want to see, 90% of the people in this country. So that's my answer.
Are there any colleagues in particular that you think would rather risk our democracy to hold on to the filibuster as it is?
I'm not going to name any names because I think people are, I don't want to use that time-worn phrase, evolving on this issue, but I think people are starting to think, wow, even if we want to raise the minimum wage some, I'm in favor of 15, but we're not going to be able to do it if they block it. And as we push, once again and once again for things that the American people have been waiting for years, including help with student loans and the like, I think it's going to become very clear what we need to do. And it was Reverend Warnock, or correctly called Senator Warnock, who I think said it best. He basically said that why are we all worried about protecting the minority rights in the US Senate instead of minority rights of voters? And the other favorite thing he said, which I just loved, which is, to me, encapsulates this for the people bill, back to the election stuff. He said 8 words that's probably better than anything I'll say on the interview. When asked, why is this happening? He said, because some people don't want some people to vote. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty well put. So to pivot to something that you just brought up, Senator, this week, 10 people in Colorado lost their lives to gun violence. It's the 7th mass shooting in 7 days in the U.S. What should the legislative response be to this tragedy? And how did Democrats pass common sense gun legislation when Republicans are a brick wall on the issue? How did Democrats get from should to did?
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually have been through on this issue the experience of going to the White House when Donald Trump was president and seated next to Mike Pence when there was that very infamous discussion that's on TV after Parkland, where President Trump, I counted, I actually have a piece of paper with hashtags, said something like 8, 9 times that he was in favor of universal background checks. He said it, okay?
We need meaningful background checks so that sick people don't get guns.
And then the next day he goes and meets with the NRA and changes his mind. Vice President Pence, actually, I talked to him during the meeting and after, favored doing something with those extreme risk protective orders, which could be very helpful in some cases. But that never really happened on the federal level. We have background checks, something that Senator Toomey and Senator Manchin have led on and continue to be in favor of. And again, because of the opposition from the White House and the failure to get to 60 votes, that didn't happen. These are all common sense things we could do. Assault weapon ban. The My Bill, which is actually could pass independently of gun legislation. Why? Because it already has in the House with 29 votes of Republicans. That's the bill that says if you have been convicted of domestic violence, right now, if it involves someone you're married to, you can't go out and get a gun. But in some states right now, if it's someone that's a dating partner, you can. And even the Republican witnesses a few years ago at a hearing said this was a huge loophole. A conservative sheriff from Racine, Wisconsin, said that dating partners shoot just as hard and hit just as hard as married partners. And so that's in there, as well as a provision that says if you've been convicted of stalking, that you can't go out and get a gun. That's really relevant to some of the hate crimes and what we've seen with women and what's happening. And so that bill is in the Violence Against Women Act. That would be the first major piece of gun legislation to pass if we can take up the Violence Against Women Act. And given that we picked up 29 Republican votes on it, that would be a significant beginning, but certainly not an end when you look at the background check, high risk provisions we could do, and some of the other very good, sensible ideas that are out there, including an assault weapon ban.
And now to another bill you've introduced, the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act.
You really know how to pick up a discussion.
Let me tell you, that is designed to reform antitrust laws. It's a very complicated and often hard to follow issue if you're not already familiar with the language. Can you break down the issue and what you're seeking to reform when it comes to antitrust laws, and how does this affect everyday Americans?
So if you wonder why your cable prices have been so high for so long, why don't you look at if there's competition or not? Usually in areas there's not. If you wonder why airfares are so high when you're maybe in a small or mid-sized city to do a link compared to another one, well, you should look at competition. If you wonder why there's only, if you're a farmer and you're trying to ship seeds to market and you got really high rates for rail, the last leg, well, that's because right now there's only 4 freight rail. There used to be dozens and dozens of them that are called Class 1 freight rails, which, by the way, is the exact same number on the monopoly board. Cat food, complete consolidation. John Oliver did a piece on this and showed for half an hour all the consolidation in online travel, of course, with Google and Facebook and the tech companies, and then ended by saying, if that's enough to make you want to die.
Well, bad luck, because the casket industry is controlled by these 3 companies.
By the way, one has now bought the other, so there's only 2. And so in the history of our country, competition has meant that lower rates, think about the breakup of AT&T. Even the chairman of AT&T said it, they came out of it stronger. That created much lower long distance rates and a really, really successful cell phone industry that before it started, your cell phones were like, we fit in a briefcase, think like Gordon Gekko on the Wall Street. And so we need this rejuvenization of capitalism. Democrats and a Republican passed the Sherman Act, which is kind of the bill. Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, always talked about his fear of the overgrown army of monopolies. And so we've always rejuvenated. And this is a time to do it. When we've got these gateway tech companies, Google literally and Facebook were willing to hold an entire country, the country of Australia, hostage because they didn't want to pay for news content. And they literally could say, we're going to leave and then you won't really have anyone. That's what monopolies do. And so there are so many exciting things we can do. And I'll just with the main things. And this one has huge bipartisan support. It's Klobuchar-Grassley. Get some more funding to the agencies. You can't take on the biggest companies in the world with duct tape and Band-Aids. The Trump administration actually at the very end, Commissioner Simon at the FTC and Macon Delrahim at the Department of Justice brought these suits against Google and Facebook. They did the right thing, but now we have to continue them on. So there's bipartisan support to change some fee structures on big mergers, and it wouldn't be taxpayer money to fund these agencies. Big deal. That's the first most bipartisan thing. Secondly, do something going forward about mergers to change the burden on the big ones so that they have to actually prove that they don't hurt competition, not radical. Third thing, existing industries as they are now. When Mark Zuckerberg, it was discovered in email he sent, this is true, came out in the Great House hearings, my friend David Cicilline did. The email said, we would rather buy than compete. Okay, we've got a problem. He's talking about buying competitors. When he said, these companies may be nascent now, I'm paraphrasing this, they may be nascent now, but they are in our brand and they have their own brand and they could become very disruptive to us. That's what tech is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to disrupt things. You're supposed to have competition. So when you look at the industries as they are now, just like they did with AT&T, but much more sophisticated now, you can make it easier to get the data, to look at the industries and to start these investigations and potentially break them up. But there's other things you can do as well. Mm-hmm. So I think these are highly successful companies, employ a bunch of people, that's great, but that doesn't mean that they can't keep going without a little competition. And if you buy out WhatsApp and Instagram, how are you ever going to get the bells and whistles for privacy and misinformation through the capitalist system if they buy everything in sight and there's no one to compete with them for stuff that people want? That's the idea. And that's why we need to change the antitrust laws and stop calling it antitrust and call it competition policy.
That sounds like a good rebrand. So you've been working on some incredibly important issues in the Senate, but one of the most impressive feats you've accomplished so far in 2021 is emceeing President Biden's inauguration. We knew you could work a crowd. We saw you in the debates, but we had no idea you were like Johnny Carson good. So
that dates you.
Well, I mean, I was a child when it.
Okay. All right. Yes.
He was the best one. If you don't end up on the Supreme Court, which we are personally trying to manifest for you, could you see yourself as a late night host? Because we can.
Well, I think the best thing, as I said, Senator Schumer was asking me afterward, because everything, and a lot of this was a tribute as well to Senator Blunt, and we worked on this together, and he really wanted to make this inauguration work. And after the insurrection at the Capitol, we literally took a stand that we, and as well as the president did, President Biden, that we're not going to back down. We're not going to go inside and have this inauguration in a bunker, which a bunch of people, by the way, wanted us to do. We're going to reclaim that platform at the very place where the spray paint was still, you could see it at the bottom of the columns where we were standing, at the same place where we had makeshift windows because the people who are trying to undermine our democracy deliberately picked that place because they knew that's where the inauguration was, and we were going to reclaim it. So for me, this was the moment, as I said that day under that beautiful blue sky with a little Minnesota snow when I walked in, is that this is a moment where we are going to pick ourselves up and dust our democracy and move forward as we always do, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that was an amazing moment. I literally felt, as did everyone there, this sense of liberation. The fact that former President Bush was there along with former President Obama and Clinton, the fact that Vice President Pence was there, along with the number of Supreme Court justices. Everyone knew what their job was today. And that was to take back our country. And in addition to that, so Schumer says, well, did anything go wrong? I'm like, yeah, one thing went really wrong. And he goes, what? I go, well, when I got there, Lady Gaga and I were wearing the same dress. Meeting Amanda Gorman and Lady Gaga was an amazing part of the day as well. Amanda Gorman, that was like spiritual, magical when she took the stage with that poem. And I don't know how many times the inauguration has ended with a poem, because sometimes you're like, ugh. But it really was something that I don't think people will ever forget who watch it for the rest of their lives.
Well, Senator Klobuchar, thank you so much for your time. And also on behalf of Twins fans everywhere, I would like to, I wish the Minnesota Twins a great season this year.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I will be cheering for them. I've been ever since I was a child. I was at the 91 World Series parade.
They won one of the World Series. So that was, okay, it was a while ago, but.
Was it 91 or 87?
I was there in the 87.
Oh, Thunderdome, the old Metrodome.
You remember, well, I wrote a book on the building of the Metrodome. It was my college senior essay.
I love that. That's maybe the most Minnesotan thing I've
done. Antitrust, but yes, I did that. Yes. And so I was there. And what was funny about the Metrodome, of course, Billy Martin, the former general manager of the Yankees, called it the most abominable park in baseball, but that's because they lost. But because the balls, it was kind of hard to see them sometimes. Because
of the white ceiling. Yeah, I used to go to
wear a pointed hat at the top of the thing because it might go through. But anyway, it might have been a hometown advantage because we seem to have won both World Series. Advantage.
Look, we'll get it back. We'll get it back at Target Field. I believe we can. Senator, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.